Michael Singleton joins me now, Republican political consultant, contributing host of Vox's Consider It, and former deputy chief of staff at HUD. Michael, good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
What's your beef with this particular thing, other than the fact that it seems to be attempting to disenfranchise?
Well, I mean, I think as a conservative, any appearance that there is some type of restriction to restrict African Americans or any marginalized group of people from being able to participate rather in the voting process does not help the Republican Party. And I think as a party that has historically, at least for the past 25 or 30 years, had a pretty difficult time targeting not only African Americans, but Hispanics, Asian Americans as well, we cannot afford, as the country becomes more diverse, to not be able to compete strategically within those communities.
So you are of the belief that there are instances in which Republicans could compete strategically for African American support and votes?
I mean, I think if you look at African Americans and Hispanics, for example, traditionally, culturally, we are very conservative. But when you ask many African Americans why they don't vote Republicans, they will point to the rhetoric. They will point to many of the positions of many Republicans running for office, particularly now in the age of President Donald Trump. And so I like to say that as an African American, that sure, there are many things that I can enjoy that perhaps my grandfather or his father could not enjoy, right? But I be so indifferent that when these types of issues arise merely because of my party affiliation that I am not to say something. And so for me, it's bigger than just being a Republican. It is, guys, you should be able to compete within a very diverse group of people. But until that changes, as I stated, I don't believe African Americans will vote Republican, and I understand why.
After 2012, the election, Mitt Romney's team had a postmortem. And one of the things that came out of that was the idea
growth and opportunity.
Right, that you don't have to move the needle too far in some things that candidates can do across the country in order to attract, as you say, African-American conservatives, many of whom are already there, but don't want to be pushed away or don't want that rhetoric to fall into the wrong place. And that's what this is. This problem, we have two distinct problems we have to deal with. Voter turnout, which is low in this country, and in some cases, in some elections, uniquely low amongst African Americans or people of color, and voter fraud, which just isn't that much of a thing.
Well, I mean,
in America.
Georgia did its own voter fraud research several years ago, Ali, and they found almost nothing there. The President of the United States, for example, wasted taxpayer dollars, I believe, a year ago.
On this voter fraud commission.
And we found nothing.
Correct.
We found nothing. So it's almost non-existent. So again, I think even the casual spectator would beg the question, if you're raising this as a legitimate concern, but your own evidence indicates that this does not exist, then I must ask you, beyond the burden of proof, why are you doing this? Why do you continue to push that narrative when your own research indicates that it doesn't exist?
And that's got to rankle some African Americans who say, look, I'd love to vote for you, conservative candidate, but could you just not do this?
Well, I mean, when you think about, for example, the White House is working on criminal justice reform. Conservatives all the time talk about people being a part of pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, being a part of their communities, working hard, etc. You have a perfect opportunity with just that issue alone 100%. To give individuals who may have made a mistake in life, as we all have, to say, you know what, we want to allow you to climb that economic ladder so that you can benefit yourself, but your family, your community. And think about it from a tax perspective, it benefits Americans writ large because you're not having to pay more for law enforcement, to build more prisons, etc. So you would think logically that is a position that Republicans would quickly move on.
That's low-hanging fruit.
It is. There have been some that have. You think about other opportunities such as education, mobility, etc. as relates to our issues with public schools. You think about some of the issues in crime-ridden places like Baltimore, Chicago, even New Orleans, my hometown, for example. And you think about the issues that plague those communities, and conservatives talk about these issues, but they never take the necessary steps or actions to actually uplift the people, although they have this message of upward mobility. And I do think for a lot of African Americans and other people of color, it does appear to be a bit hypocritical.
All right, I'd love to continue this conversation, particularly on criminal justice reform and prison reform and urban renewal. So we'll have you back to do that. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Michael Singleton is a Republican political consultant.